Chosen one. Listen, dearly beloved anointed ones. The most destabilizing thing you can do in a dysfunctional system is not to fight it. It is to outgrow it. Nobody warned you that growth has a blast radius. Not the motivational speakers, not the self-help books, not the people who told you to just focus on yourself, like that would not quietly ruin someone else's entire coping mechanism. Because the truth is, some systems do not collapse from attack. They collapse from irrelevance. And you did not walk in with a plan to shake the room. You just changed. That is it. No announcement, no dramatic exit, no grand reveal. You adjusted your life, your standards, your energy, and somewhere else, a group chat caught fire. Here is a fact most people do not talk about. Social structures depend on predictability more than honesty. Psychologists have observed that when a person suddenly becomes non-reactive, self-directed, and emotionally unavailable for manipulation, it triggers the same stress response in others as an actual loss of control. In plain language, when people cannot push your buttons anymore, their nervous system panics. That is when the overreactions start. The side comments, the weird behavior, the sudden obsession with what you are doing, who you are with, and why you are not playing your old role anymore. And the funny part, truly funny in a dark, ironic way, is that you were not even trying to be disruptive. You did not expose secrets. You did not flip tables. You did not prove them wrong. You simply stopped leaking energy into spaces that thrived on your confusion. You became inconveniently stable, calm in a way that cannot be baited, focused in a way that does not need applause. That is when the meltdown began. Not because you did too much, but because you stopped doing what benefited everyone else. What you are watching now is not drama. It is withdrawal. It is people realizing the version of you they built their expectations around no longer exists, and they forgot to plan for that. So they spiral, they overreact. They laugh too loud, talk too much, and pretend not to care while caring more than ever. All because you accidentally walked off the stage they were still performing on. And that is where this gets interesting. Because when someone melts down over your quiet growth, it is not about you at all. It is about the system that needed you small, predictable, and available, suddenly realizing you are none of those things anymore. Number one, you did not expose them. Your existence did. What really shook people was not anything you said or did. It was the simple fact that you kept living, growing, and showing up without carrying the shame they quietly assigned to you. You did not call a meeting. You did not clear your name. You did not defend your past. You just kept existing in a way that no longer matched the story they told themselves about you. And that is what made it unbearable. When someone's narrative depends on you staying a certain way, your evolution feels like a personal attack, even when it has nothing to do with them. A lot of people think exposure happens through confrontation or truth bombs. It does not. Real exposure happens when your life becomes evidence, when you are still standing, still functioning, still becoming more grounded, more focused, more self-directed. Your stability quietly contradicts every excuse they used to justify how they treated you or what they believed about you. They cannot argue with that. They cannot discredit it without looking unreasonable. So instead, they unravel. What makes this especially uncomfortable for them is that you did not demand accountability. You did not ask for an apology. You did not even ask to be understood. You moved on without dragging them into your next chapter, and that removed their chance to control the outcome. People can handle being challenged. What they struggle with is being rendered irrelevant to the story altogether. There is also something deeply unsettling about someone who refuses to perform their pain anymore. When you stop explaining yourself, stop oversharing, stop reliving what hurt you just to make others comfortable, it forces them to sit with their own role in things. That is when defensiveness kicks in, That is when you see emotional reactions that do not match the situation. The truth is, your existence became a mirror, not because you tried to reflect anything back at them, but because mirrors do not need intention to reveal what is there. They just show it. You did not expose them by pointing fingers. You exposed them by becoming proof that the version of reality they relied on no longer holds up. And once that happens, the meltdown is not about you at all. It is about the collapse of a lie they were never ready to let go of. Number 2. The meltdown started the moment they realized you were not broken anymore. For a long time, people were comfortable with you being almost okay, trying, healing, figuring things out. That version of you made sense to them because it fit neatly into their expectations. You were allowed to grow, but only in small, manageable ways. As long as you still doubted yourself, second-guessed your decisions, or needed reassurance, everything felt familiar. You were still readable, still reachable, still explainable. The shift happened quietly. You did not announce that you were healed. You did not declare yourself whole. You just stopped moving like someone who needed fixing. Your reactions changed. Your decisions became cleaner. You no longer circled back to situations that drained you just to prove loyalty or keep the peace. And that is when people noticed something was different. Not louder, not colder, just done. What unsettles people is not confidence. It is completion. A person who is still wounded can be negotiated with. A person who is no longer broken does not need permission, validation, or saving. That is where the panic comes from. They suddenly realize their role in your life had expired, and no one likes finding out they are no longer needed without being consulted first. There is also an unspoken advantage people gain when someone around them is struggling. It gives them context, leverage, sometimes even purpose. When you healed, you removed that dynamic. You were not someone to advise, manage, worry about, or talk around anymore. You became self-directed, and that is disorienting for people who were used to positioning themselves above, ahead of, or in charge of you. The meltdown did not come from envy alone. It came from loss of access, loss of relevance, loss of the familiar version of you that made them feel steady in their own role. That is why their reactions seem exaggerated or delayed. They are not responding to who you are now. They are grieving the version of you they could predict. You did not become arrogant. You became intact. And for people who were only comfortable with you in pieces, wholeness feels like a threat they never prepared for. Number 3. You disrupted a hierarchy without ever competing. The most chaotic thing you did was not winning or overtaking anyone. It was not about fighting for recognition or climbing over people to get ahead. It was much quieter, much deeper. You simply became uncontainable within the roles they expected you to play. You did not step into a game they were controlling. You stepped outside it entirely. That alone is enough to break a hierarchy. Systems and people rely on predictability. And when someone refuses to play by the rules, not aggressively, but simply by existing on their own terms, the entire balance shatters. They expected you to fit into the pattern. The subordinate, the helper, the confused, the indecisive. They were comfortable managing you, manipulating the pace, and keeping the narrative skewed in their favor. Then you stopped waiting for permission. You stopped making your growth convenient for them. You started moving, deciding, and acting according to your own timing and standards, and suddenly, the invisible ladder they were climbing, the control they thought they had, looked irrelevant because it was not anchored to you anymore. People around you felt threatened, not because you competed with them, but because your freedom exposed how much of their influence depended on your limitations. Someone being free without creating chaos does not fit into the world of controlled hierarchies. You did not try to show superiority, but your self-direction automatically highlighted their dependency. The cracks in their control were visible to everyone, And that is what fueled the panic, the overreactions, and the gossip. All because their position was destabilized by something they could not pin down or attack. And the humor in all this is that you did not even notice you were dismantling anything. You were not plotting. You were not performing. You simply refused to remain smaller than your potential. And the fallout came from their failure to adjust to a reality where your existence and choices were no longer negotiable. By simply living fully and independently, you redefined the rules without speaking a word. Number 4. They are panicking because they cannot control the story anymore. What triggers a meltdown faster than anything else is the realization that the narrative they carefully constructed about you is slipping through their fingers. For years, they shaped the story, your reputation, your behavior, your choices, to fit their comfort. They whispered behind your back, exaggerated your flaws, minimized your wins, and painted you into a box that made them feel safe, superior, or in control. That story was not about truth. It was about their sense of power. And now, suddenly, the script does not work anymore. You did not have to confront anyone or dismantle their lies outright. You just lived, made choices, and moved forward in a way that did not line up with the version of you they had been feeding others. When reality refuses to match a narrative, the people invested in that story experience cognitive dissonance, a psychological panic where nothing feels stable anymore. Their authority, credibility, and even their self-image begin to crumble. They start overreacting, misreading your intentions, and lashing out in ways that make no sense because they are desperately trying to regain control over something that is, at this point, uncontrollable. The irony is brutal. The more they panic, the clearer it becomes to everyone around them that the story was never yours to begin with. Every whispered rumor, every defensive comment, every manipulative gesture only highlights that their version of events was dependent on your compliance. The meltdown is their confession, unfiltered and messy. It is chaos disguised as anger, fear, and disbelief. And it happens precisely because you chose to live authentically without needing permission or validation. And the thing that makes it almost funny, if you can detach from the tension, is that you are completely innocent in this. You did not plot to destabilize anyone. You did not even think about their story. You simply stopped fitting into it. By refusing to participate in the illusions they relied on, you forced them to confront the uncomfortable truth. They have no power over your reality anymore. And that loss of control is the source of every frantic reaction, every awkward comment, and every meltdown that now seems utterly out of proportion. Number 5. Your calm is being misread as arrogance, and that is the funny part. The moment you stopped reacting to chaos the way they expected, people started noticing something strange: your calmness. You were not louder, sharper, or more aggressive. You were simply steady. Your energy did not spike when others tried to provoke you. Your focus did not waver when they threw drama your way. And that is when it got uncomfortable for them. Calmness, when everyone around is anxious, often reads as arrogance. It is not about pride, it is about consistency. But people used to measuring their worth through comparison cannot handle someone operating outside their emotional roller coaster. For years, they relied on your reactions to validate their own existence. Your panic, your confusion, your uncertainty gave them structure, predictability, and even purpose. Once you stopped feeding the chaos, they started over-interpreting everything you did. Your silence became a statement. Your boundaries became a challenge. Your composure became a sign of superiority. Even though all you were doing was existing without needing approval, that is the beauty and the humor of it. You did not try to intimidate anyone, and yet they felt exposed, cornered, and unsettled simply because you did not conform to their expectations. What makes this even more destabilizing is that calmness cannot be faked convincingly for long. People can mimic confidence, act like they are in control, or project bravado. But your calmness is rooted in internal alignment. It comes from clarity, self-respect, and independence. And when someone who has relied on their ability to manipulate your responses encounters a person who does not react predictably, it triggers a panic they cannot rationalize. The meltdown that follows is often loud, dramatic, or over the top because they are trying to reclaim control they never had. But the irony is undeniable. Your composed presence is not an attack. It is a reflection of your own mastery over self and circumstance. And while they struggle to interpret it correctly, you continue moving, steady and unbothered, proving that sometimes the strongest disruption comes not from confrontation or noise, but from being quietly unshakable in a world desperate to provoke a reaction. Number 6. You accidentally exposed who was only powerful by proximity. Some people only look important because they have latched onto someone else's energy, success, or struggle. They have built their influence on access, on being attached to the version of you that could be managed, pushed, or guided. Their power is not real. It is borrowed, and when you step into a place where you no longer need to be managed, when you stop feeding into the roles that once made them feel significant, their whole foundation collapses. That is when the meltdown begins, not because you attacked them, but because you simply stopped being the source of their perceived strength. The moment you became self-directed, fully accountable for your own energy and decisions, the illusion they had cultivated was exposed. The people who thrived on proximity suddenly looked small, weak, and reactive. They scrambled because they realized their identity was intertwined with controlling or benefiting from you. Without that dynamic, they have nothing to lean on, nothing to inflate their ego, and suddenly they feel invisible in the very space where they once claimed authority. It is even more destabilizing because you did not plan this. You did not intend to reveal weaknesses. You did not speak out to unmask anyone. You just existed freely. And freedom has a way of spotlighting people who relied on manipulation, leverage, or access rather than genuine competence. All the energy they invested in controlling, influencing, or observing you becomes useless. Their reactions get louder, more erratic, and sometimes ridiculous because they are processing a sudden collapse of identity. The irony is stark. The meltdown makes it obvious who was never capable of real power and who has been living off the energy of others. And you are watching it happen without even participating, quietly moving forward, building your own path. You did not expose them by force. You exposed them by living beyond the limits they assigned to you. The fallout is their responsibility, and their panic is the proof that their authority was never as solid as it appeared. Your life simply made visible what they were too fragile to maintain on their own. Number 7. They cannot copy what they do not understand. One of the most frustrating things for people watching your rise is that they cannot replicate it. They study your moves, your timing, your habits, and even your energy, trying desperately to reverse engineer what makes you work. But what they fail to see is that your growth is not a formula. It is integration. It is the sum of your experiences, your choices, your failures, and your unseen battles, all combined in a way that only you could produce. You did not follow a playbook, and that makes your presence untouchable, and in a sense threatening. They try to imitate confidence, productivity, or discipline, but it falls flat because those things are not separate from your inner alignment. Your calm under pressure, your decisiveness, your refusal to bend to manipulation. These are not techniques. They are reflections of a life lived deliberately, consciously, and authentically. The more they try to copy it, the more obvious it becomes that they are pretending. Every forced attempt to mimic you highlights the gap between their facade and your reality. That is where the panic sets in. They realize they are stuck in imitation while you are advancing effortlessly in authenticity. This inability to copy you destabilizes people in ways that make their reactions extreme. They become loud, critical, defensive, or obsessive, because they see your progress and cannot reconcile it with their own stagnation. The envy is not just about what you have, it is about what you represent, proof that personal evolution is possible, but only when it is real, internal, and unmanufactured. And the ironic twist is that you do not even have to try to intimidate them. Your life, lived without pretense, already outpaces any strategy they might attempt. They panic, not because you are ahead of them, but because they cannot understand, control, or replicate the foundation beneath your achievements. Their frustration, confusion, and meltdown are the natural consequences of confronting a reality they cannot steal. Your authenticity is untouchable, and every meltdown around you is just a reminder that some things cannot be faked, copied, or contained, especially a life lived in alignment with truth. Number 8, your evolution exposed who was pretending to evolve. The most uncomfortable truth people face when you grow is realizing how little growth they have actually done themselves. They talk about self-improvement, mindfulness, and ambition. But those words are often just window dressing, an image carefully curated to convince others, and sometimes themselves, that they are moving forward. Meanwhile, you are actually changing. You are shedding old patterns, making better decisions, and holding yourself accountable in ways that are not performative. That contrast is brutal, and that is why the meltdown starts. They cannot hide behind their act anymore. Your evolution is like a mirror they cannot close. Every choice you make, every boundary you enforce, every step forward in confidence highlights the gap between what they say and what they do. They feel exposed, not because of anything you have done to them directly, but because your life makes their pretenses visible. That discomfort turns into panic, defensiveness, and overreaction. Suddenly, their casual arrogance or assumed superiority collapses under the weight of someone who is quietly, deliberately becoming more than they are. What is even more destabilizing is that you are not performing growth. You are not announcing your achievements, bragging about your clarity, or trying to make anyone look small. You simply exist as someone who has integrated their lessons and experiences into real change. The authenticity of your evolution forces them to confront themselves in a way they are not prepared for. And humans by nature resist confrontation that comes without warning. When they see your life moving forward, while theirs feels stagnant, panic, jealousy, and irrational reactions are inevitable. The meltdown is not about competition, it is about truth. Your presence makes it clear who has been honest with themselves and who has been faking it. And the irony is, the more they try to explain you away, belittle your progress, or disrupt your peace, the more obvious it becomes that their growth was never real. Your evolution shines a light on false versions of themselves, and the chaos that follows is the natural result of being forced to face a truth they have long ignored. Some people talk about growth, but you live it. Number 9. The meltdown is proof they were watching you closer than you knew. One of the most revealing aspects of human behavior is how closely people monitor what they fear losing control over. Long before the meltdown, they were observing you in subtle ways, noticing your habits, your patterns, the timing of your decisions, even the way your energy shifted in certain spaces. They did not admit it, and you likely had no clue, but their sense of security was tied to knowing you inside out, predicting your moves, and managing the impact you could have on their environment. Their fixation was invisible, but it was real. When you changed, evolved, or stopped conforming to their expectations, it was not just inconvenient, it was a shock to their system. They had memorized a version of you that no longer existed. Every action you took that did not fit their mental map caused panic, because they realized all that observation had been built on a false premise. All the energy they invested in tracking, controlling, and anticipating your behavior suddenly felt wasted. That is why the meltdown seems exaggerated or disproportionate. It is not about the present moment, it is about the collapse of months or years of covert monitoring. The irony is unmistakable. Their obsession with you made them blind to the fact that their influence was limited. They were so focused on studying and predicting you that they failed to notice you were quietly learning, adjusting, and moving beyond their scope. And because your evolution happened silently, without fanfare or confrontation, it hit them like a revelation they were not prepared to process. That is why the meltdown often looks chaotic, absurd, or over the top. It is not just about you. It is about their panic over losing the illusion of control. Every defensive comment, every awkward reaction, every attempt to reassert relevance is evidence of just how closely they were watching and how unnervingly dependent they had become on that surveillance. Your life, your calm, and your freedom forced them to face the uncomfortable truth. They were never in control. And that realization, when it finally hits, triggers a storm that cannot be contained. If this kind of content speaks to something in you, consider subscribing. There is more ahead. Number 10. You broke an unspoken agreement, and they never told you it existed. Some of the most powerful reactions come not from what you did, but from what people assumed you would do somewhere along the line. An invisible contract was formed, not written, not spoken, but deeply understood by those around you. It dictated who you were allowed to be, what boundaries you could set, how far you could grow, and which parts of yourself could remain hidden. For years, they relied on this unspoken agreement to keep you within limits that suited them. They expected compliance, predictability, and availability. And then quietly, without fanfare, you broke it. You did not announce a rebellion. You did not confront anyone about their expectations. You simply started living on your own terms. You made choices that felt right for you without seeking approval or reassurance. And in doing so, you shattered a framework they did not even bother to communicate. The shock is intense because it feels like betrayal to someone who thought you were theirs to shape. The meltdown that follows is not really about your actions. It is about their loss of control and the collapse of a narrative they assumed would never be challenged. What makes this so disorienting for them is the combination of invisibility and inevitability. They never saw it coming because the rules were never official, and yet their reactions are explosive because their sense of order depended entirely on those invisible boundaries. Every boundary you establish, every decision you make without their consent, feels like a direct affront, even though it is simply you living authentically. And the beauty, almost cruel in its simplicity, is that you did not need to prove a point. You did not need to create drama or make a spectacle. Your life, lived openly, exposed the truth. Unspoken agreements are only as powerful as the compliance they rely on. Once you refuse to comply, the entire structure collapses, and the meltdown becomes a theatrical display of desperation, confusion, and the harsh reality that their expectations never mattered to you and never will. Number 11. They are spiraling because your freedom made their excuses loud. One of the most unsettling experiences for people around you is witnessing your freedom in motion while they remain trapped in their own justifications. For years, they relied on a carefully constructed narrative to explain why they were not progressing, why they were not stepping up, or why they were not taking risks. Your life moving forward without hesitation or apology exposes every one of those excuses for what they really are. Fragile stories designed to protect their ego. That is when the spiral begins. Your freedom is not flashy. It does not scream. You do not need to announce that you are living on your own terms. You simply stop bending to others' expectations. Stop asking for permission. And stop over-explaining yourself. That silent independence is like a spotlight on people who have built their lives on delay, fear, or justification. Suddenly, their internal dialogue, the reasoning they have used to feel comfortable in their own stagnation, becomes impossible to ignore. Your presence forces a reckoning, and their reactions become louder, messier, and more erratic because they are confronting the truth of their own inaction. It is fascinating and ironic because your life is not even about them. You are not trying to shame anyone, expose anyone, or make anyone look bad yet. Your forward motion acts as a mirror. Every choice you make that reflects clarity, courage, and purpose is an unspoken commentary on what they have avoided. And humans by nature resist being confronted with inconvenient truths, especially when they did not ask for the reflection. That resistance manifests as panic, defensiveness, overanalysis, or emotional outbursts. The meltdown is not evidence of your power over them. It is evidence of their dependency on false narratives. They cannot replicate your authenticity, and they cannot explain away the reality that your freedom exists independently of their approval. Every awkward comment, passive-aggressive move, or sudden concern is simply noise born out of desperation. The sound of their excuses crumbling under the weight of your unshakable presence. And the wild part is that you did not do anything intentionally provocative. You just refused to live small. And in doing so, you exposed the truth they never wanted to face. Number 12. You did not win. The game collapsed around you. The chaos you are witnessing is not about victory in the traditional sense. You did not have to beat anyone, outsmart anyone, or dominate a system to trigger the meltdown. What happened is far more powerful. The structure itself could not survive your presence. You stopped playing by the rules, stopped participating in the invisible games, and simply lived in a way that made the existing system crumble on its own. That is what makes it so destabilizing for everyone around you. They thought the game controlled you. But in reality, your refusal to play the way they expected exposed the fragility of the entire setup. People get attached to patterns, hierarchies, and routines because it gives them a sense of control. When someone in the system stops moving predictably, it sends a ripple through everything. They panic, they overreact, they scramble for explanations because the foundation they relied on, which they assumed was unshakable, suddenly feels unstable. And here is the thing, you were not even targeting the system. You were not trying to take anyone down. You were not winning a contest. You were just existing with integrity, focus, and independence. And that is enough to break things that were never built to handle truth. The meltdown is loud, messy, and over the top because people are forced to confront their own reliance on illusions. They realize that control, influence, and perceived power were all contingent on your compliance or predictability. And once that disappears, there is nothing holding it together. That is why their reactions seem exaggerated or irrational. They are not responding to a threat. They are responding to the collapse of a carefully maintained world. What is remarkable is that you can walk through it all without raising your voice, making a statement, or taking an aggressive stance. Your presence alone is enough to prove that the game never really mattered, except to those who depended on it to feel secure. And while they panic, scramble, and try to restore balance, you move forward quietly, untouched by the chaos, showing that true power does not come from winning a game. It comes from living authentically while the rest of the world struggles to adjust. Number 13. They are laughing nervously because denial is failing. When people start laughing in awkward, forced ways or cracking jokes that do not land, it is rarely about humor. It is about panic dressed up as levity. They are trying to maintain control over a reality they can no longer deny. For a long time, denial was their safety net. They told themselves stories that justified their behavior, minimized your presence, or explained away your growth. But as your life began to operate outside the boundaries they set, that denial started to crumble. The nervous laughter is the sound of a defense mechanism failing, the audible evidence that the truth is hitting harder than they can handle. What is fascinating is how exposed it makes them. Every laugh, every overreaction, every awkward comment is a signal that the narrative they have been clinging to is collapsing. They thought they could manage you, interpret your moves, or contain your energy. Now they cannot. Your calm, your freedom, your consistency, all of it contrasts starkly with the chaotic internal state they are trying to hide. The nervous humor is an unconscious attempt to reclaim composure, to convince themselves and anyone watching that they are still in control, even as everything inside them screams the opposite. The meltdown that follows is not random. It is a precise reaction to the dissonance they feel between their perception and reality. They are confronting a truth they tried to ignore for too long. You are not what they assumed. You do not belong to the story they wrote, and their attempts to manipulate the outcome are failing. Their laughter, their jokes, and their forced bravado are just the surface of a deeper emotional storm. And the irony is undeniable. You did not provoke this intentionally. You did not attack, criticize, or manipulate. You simply lived authentically and refused to perform the role they expected. Their nervous laughter is proof that denial has limits, and their meltdown is proof that facing truth without preparation is terrifying. While they scramble to process it, you continue moving forward, untouched by the chaos, a living reminder that honesty, consistency, and self-alignment are far more disruptive than confrontation ever could be. Number 14. The funniest part is, you did not even notice at first. The most poetic aspect of all this chaos is that while everyone else was losing their minds over your actions, or rather your presence, you were completely unaware. You were not orchestrating drama, provoking reactions, or even trying to be impressive. You were simply living your life, making choices that felt right, and stepping into the version of yourself you had been working toward. And that unintentional nature of your impact is what makes the situation almost hilarious to anyone watching from the outside, and eventually to you as well. People around you expected predictable reactions. They expected explanations, apologies, or justifications. They relied on your past patterns to dictate how they could manipulate, control, or read you. Then you stopped performing the role they assigned. You did not announce it. You did not explain it. You did not even think about the chaos it would cause. You moved with clarity, focus, and self-respect, simply stepping into the life you were meant to live. That is when the meltdown began. Every overreaction, awkward comment, and desperate attempt to regain control was fueled by a truth they could not process. You had moved on without consulting them. The irony is that your innocence in all this makes it even more destabilizing. People can handle confrontation, challenge, or even critique. But what they cannot handle is someone changing quietly, deliberately, and successfully without ever involving them. That is why the reactions seem extreme, unbalanced, and even absurd at times. The more you focus on yourself and your growth, the more obvious it becomes to others how dependent they were on your past limitations. And the humor in it cannot be overstated. While they are spiraling, you continue living, learning, and evolving, completely unaware that your very existence has triggered chaos. You did not plan it, and you did not try to cause it. You just became a version of yourself that no longer fits into their control. That unintentional brilliance is what makes the situation both disruptive and quietly hilarious. In the end, your life moved forward and theirs collapsed. All without you lifting a finger. Proof that sometimes the greatest impact is made simply by being fully, unapologetically yourself. The truth is, what you have just witnessed, the chaos, the panic, the overreactions, and the frantic attempts to regain control, is not about you at all. It is about people confronting a reality they were never prepared to face. That you are no longer predictable, no longer confined, and no longer operating under the limitations they secretly relied on. Every meltdown, every awkward reaction, every desperate attempt to explain you away is proof that your growth, your calm, your freedom, and your authenticity have shattered illusions that were propped up for far too long. What makes it even more remarkable is that you did not plan it. You did not fight for it, and you did not even notice the ripple effect at first. You simply chose yourself, your integrity, and your evolution. And that alone proved to be more destabilizing than any confrontation or argument could ever be. This is not just about watching people unravel. It is about understanding the incredible power that comes from living intentionally and unapologetically. It is about realizing that you do not need to prove yourself to anyone, manipulate anyone, or force anyone to recognize your worth. When you live fully in alignment with your truth, your life speaks louder than any words, exposes what was always hidden, and triggers transformations or panics without you lifting a finger. The meltdowns around you are simply echoes of the change you have embodied. The collapse of false narratives, the exposure of pretense, and the unveiling of reality that they were not ready to accept. This is your reminder that your calm, your independence, and your authenticity are more disruptive than chaos, more powerful than manipulation, and infinitely more revealing than confrontation. You do not need to fight anyone to change the dynamic. You only need to step fully into yourself, and as the dust settles, the ones panicking will realize too late that their reactions were never about you. They were about what they could no longer control. And your life is the living proof of what happens when someone refuses to play by their rules. If something in this resonated with you, subscribe and turn on notifications so you do not miss what comes next. And share this with someone who needs to hear it. Your growth does not just impact you. It changes the energy around you in ways most people are not ready to handle. God bless you.